How we doing, folks? Your host Moose here on the Pitt Panthers Football Network as we welcome you to our Season 7 Week 1 around the NCAA recap show. A full week of games, really packed slate, and so we got a lot of games to look at. Let's take a look at what happened around the NCAA here in Week 1. And of course, your Panthers opened up with a 34-16 victory over the rival West Virginia Mountaineers in the revival of the Backyard Brawl regular season series. It was a huge start for Pitt. Of course, nobody got on the board until the second quarter, but when the Panthers did, they came out with a bang. 20 points in the second stanza, 14 in the fourth quarter. West Virginia did fight back with a couple of touchdowns in the fourth quarter, but it was a case of too little too late, and the Panthers emerged with a 34-16 victory, and it was comprehensive, you have to say. They looked very good offensively. The rushing attack was solid. CJ Kirk in the passing game hit the big plays when they needed to. Of course, Rogers, the real story, with a couple of the deep balls that he went for. But overall, the Panthers just looked very good in general. In the red zone, they were solid. 2 touchdowns on 4 trips, a field goal as well. And I don't remember, I think the last one that they didn't score on was just the end of the game, if I remember correctly. So that hurt their red zone tally a little bit, but still a very solid performance for Pitt. CJ Kirk, of course, as we mentioned, 346 yards, 3 touchdowns on just 27 attempts. So one of his best quarterback ratings of his career. Didn't rush for very much, of course, for the Panther quarterback, but the remainder of their players really got things going. Davion Reynolds, 100 yards on 22 carries. Carter, 41 yards on 7 attempts. Other than his fumble on his first carry, thought he looked very good spelling Reynolds. And Rogers, they used him on the reverses. Didn't get a ton of traction, but at least helped to keep the Mountaineer defense guessing. And where Rogers really shined was in the passing game. 6 catches, 157 yards, 2 touchdowns in his first ever collegiate game for the redshirt freshman. Unbelievable performance. Davion Reynolds looked great out of the backfield as well, 63 yards and a touchdown, 3 catches. KJ Welsh on Yango, Nash Jackson, Christian Klump. Basically everybody got a piece of the receiving game in this one. No one player was the real focus other than Rogers on those couple of deep balls, but otherwise I thought the Panthers did a really good job of spreading the ball around and keeping West Virginia's defense guessing. Defensively, Adarion Mitchell was the real star. 3 sacks for the Pitt senior defender. Finally looks like he's coming into his own. His freshman year, his sophomore year, he just looked lost. Even the beginning of his junior year, back end of the junior year, looked very good. And finally, as a senior, it looks like he may be taking on a role as a leader of the defense. 3 sacks was huge. Dio Langston, sophomore JUCO transfer, playing his first ever Division I FBS game. Did not look out of place at all. Thought he played very well. Made a big stop on a 2-point conversion attempt as well. Good solid game for the Panthers. Some solid deflections. Matt Emery with a pair of deflections. Youngling and Jacobs each with a knockaway as well. Thought it was a very solid game for the Panthers all around. Obviously, a few big plays here and there for the Mountaineers, but nothing particularly egregious for a Pitt defense that really is bringing almost a Pitt team that's bringing hardly anybody back. Of course, so many different positional changes. The big area where the Panthers do have a little bit of continuities on the defensive line and in the secondary, but Mitchell really the only starting linebacker coming back. All they brought back in their defensive secondary was their 3 corners, so you'd expect that to be good. They did get after the quarterback, but not from a lot of their defensive linemen. Malachi Bordeaux doesn't have a sack in this one. Jalen Hills did have one, which is good to see. He was tied for the team lead in sacks last year, so if he can continue that kind of pressure and get back to his form from the first half of last season, that will be huge for Pitt. Of course, James for West Virginia, his first career start, does throw for almost 250 yards. Not a bad game, and it didn't help that they didn't really lean on the rushing attack. I don't think they attempted a run with their running back until middle of the second quarter, and Gates ended up not having a bad game as far as yards per attempt wise. They had a great play on an end around reverse where they went for 26 yards as well. So I think if West Virginia would have leaned on the rushing attack more, they could have maybe stayed in the game early on rather than falling behind the 8 ball and relying on the passing game, where Bryce Green had a great game, rivaled Cino Rogers in terms of production, but otherwise not particularly impressive were the Mountaineers passing the football, and didn't really threaten the Panthers until they were already so far behind that you knew they were going to have to pass it. And okay, they get a couple of big plays off. Not the end of the world. Jamichael White, incredible player. The sophomore safety for West Virginia, had a really big game. Rogers, 3 sacks for him. Casey Rogers, the junior DT. But otherwise, some of the big names we talked about for West Virginia did not have particularly impressive games. Paul Harvey, the defensive end. Clarence Gross had a sack, but not too much else. The likes of Billy Young, etc., didn't do too much to trouble the Panthers. Harvey, you can see, just with one tackle. And so overall, a comprehensive win for the Panthers, and one they'll really expect to build on going into their next matchup. So a big victory to start off the season and lead them into a tough stretch of games. Pitt's going to play 7 games in 7 weeks to open the season, and so I think that's going to make things very interesting to see what kind of role the Panthers are able to get on to start the year. Of course, a few games on Thursday. Big one between North Carolina and South Carolina, 28-21. The Tar Heels held on in that one, and that's going to lead us into our look at ACC play. Of course, North Carolina winning. The big upset of the weekend, Wake Forest going down to FCS Southeast 21-17. What a dramatic loss right there for the Demon Deacons. Tough way to start their season. Miami ends up having an easy way with Florida Atlantic, 30-13 victory for Travis Bolden, the quarterback, and the Hurricanes over the Owls. Penn State, like we saw, beats Syracuse 31-28. Louisiana Tech knocks off NC State, who had a tough go of it last season and a very tough start to this campaign. I think they were 3-9 last year. Off to a rough start yet again are the Wolfpack. Georgia Tech, an easy 45-10 victory for the Yellow Jackets. Virginia escapes BYU 31-24 in overtime. Take a look at this. UVA late scores in the fourth quarter and then a game-winning touchdown. BYU unable to match that in overtime. Boston College blowing out an FCS East school 56-0. Alabama easily dispatching Virginia Tech, who of course breaking in a new quarterback, Steve Love, for the Hokies. Alabama ran roughshod all over them. Big victory there for the Crimson Tide. Duke just escaped an FCS squad 21-14. So really the only big losses were NC State down to Louisiana Tech and Wake down to FCS Southeast. In the top 25, UCF 28-14. Not too pretty, but they do get the win in Jaden Maxwell Jr.'s first career start. Minnesota with a big win over UNLV, 41-40 for the Golden Gophers. Take a look at this. 2 late touchdowns to end up coming from behind and getting the win in this one. Huge game there for the Golden Gophers. USC 33-7 over Hawaii. Easy win for the Trojans coming off the back of a really good season. Utah falls down to Utah State 34-17. Big rivalry upset there for State. Of course, Penn State wins. Ohio State escapes Buffalo 38-31 in overtime. D.D. Harris with the touchdown run for the Buckeyes to give them the victory late on. Michigan cruises to a 27-0 victory over Central Michigan. Oklahoma State blows out Mississippi State 41-14. Huge game for the Cowboys there. Oregon beats an FCS squad very handily. Florida, easy victory 36-14 over Toledo. Iowa puts up a 50-burger and blows out Northern Illinois 58-21. Cincinnati, after a rough start, ends up going 35-20 win over Purdue. AC Reese with 2 touchdown passes, 3 total touchdowns as he ran for a score as well. Big game for him in his first start for the Bearcats, the former Pitt quarterback. Texas A&M blows out Rice. Oklahoma starts their title defense with an easy win over ULM. Notre Dame 27-6 over Temple. Iowa State wins. Auburn gets back to winning ways. They were 3-9, I think it was, last year as well. They had a really down year. They get a big win over Washington State to start their season. Tennessee 48-7 over an FCS squad. They'll take on Pitt next week. Georgia, Ole Miss, SEC showdown, and the Bulldogs put a whooping on the Rebels 52-28. Take a look at the scoreline here. Carter Ford put on an absolute show. 6 touchdown passes. He ran for a touchdown as well in the victory for Georgia. Bama, of course, with their win. LSU 41-6 over TCU. First play of the game, Jacoby Sutton, best receiver in the country, gets a 75-yard touchdown pass, and from then the route was on. Big win for LSU to cap off the week. So following those performances, we take a look at the players of the week. Carter Ford, the Georgia quarterback, 7 touchdown performance, over 500 total yards of offense, 449 yards passing, 81 rushing, 6 pass touchdowns, 1 rushing touchdown. One of the best performances we've seen in seasons in this dynasty. Unbelievable game for him. Then defensively, Joe Heath, senior outside linebacker for Arkansas State, with a pair of picks and a forced fumble in the Red Wolves victory. For the ACC, Corey Ellis, left end for Duke, 2 sacks, forced a fumble, and had an interception in their victory over an FCS opponent. While Preston Castillo, the backup quarterback for Georgia Tech, playing due to a disciplinary action for starting quarterback Scott Brown. He only was going to miss the first game, but Preston Castillo comes in, albeit against an overmatched opponent, but 266 yards passing and 4 touchdowns plus 40 yards in the ground. Nothing to shake a stick at. And with Brown being, I believe, a senior this year, Castillo definitely one to watch for the future for the Yellow Jackets. Taking a look at the top 25 now. Again, it's going to take a couple of weeks for this to all shake itself out. But Clemson didn't play this week. They're still atop the number 1 poll. Ohio State 2nd, Alabama 3rd, Georgia 4th. I should say with Clemson, they're in pole position in 1st. Everybody stays the same in the top 10. The only time you see any movement at all comes down as Iowa State jumps into the polls jumps up to 22. Iowa, Tennessee each move up. Memphis comes in at 25, with Utah dropping out after their loss to Utah State. Your Panthers have a chance to make some moves, taking on number 24, Tennessee, this week. And so that will lead us into our Week 2 preview. Around the ACC to start off, Louisville taking on newcomers Charlotte in a Friday night showdown under the lights. It'll be the first game in the FBS for the 49ers. That should be a fun matchup. Louisville's first game of the year as well. Marshall and Virginia Tech will take each other on. Both lost last week. Tulane will take on Syracuse, who looks to get back on track. Army will look to get back to winning ways. Or Wake Forest, I should say, will look to get back to winning ways as they take on a solid Army team that always plays everyone tough. North Carolina will take on Middle Tennessee State. Clemson, their opener of the season against an FCS squad playing the Citadel. Boston College will head away from home to take on USC, so tough go for the Eagles, but they're off to a good start. Miami and Florida is your college game day matchup of the week. Huge showdown between the Hurricanes and the Gators. Always a big rivalry match, and both teams with high expectations for this year. NC State, another, will get an FCS opponent this week. Maybe that'll be a little bit easier than Louisiana Tech. Florida State will play their season opener, taking on an FCS squad. And Virginia will host Oregon, a very, very tough opening stretch for the Cavaliers, who already beat BYU last week. In the top 25, we'll be able to see of course, a bunch of ACC games. Iowa will take on Maryland in a Big Ten showdown. Oklahoma State will take on Texas San Antonio. SMU, Texas A&M in a great matchup between 2 Texas schools. Not a conference game, though. SMU now in the Big 12. Texas A&M, of course, though, in the SEC. San Jose State, Minnesota. You got Boston College, USC. Wisconsin, an FCS squad. San Diego State, Ohio State. Miami, Florida, of course, is going to be a great showdown. Both teams very, very talented. Florida with a really good defense to watch out for. Notre Dame taking on Purdue, a team that has really talented players but hasn't seemed to be able to put it together. Of course, the Irish, always very impressive, so that should be a good showdown. Houston taking on a talented UCF team with one of the best young quarterbacks in the country. But the Cougars, of course, in the college football playoff just a few years ago, 2020, so we'll see how they fare against UCF. Arkansas State will take on Memphis. Should be a real test for the Red Wolves, as they are always in and around the top 15 after running the table in the Sun Belt. We'll see if Memphis can give them some trouble. Georgia, South Carolina is going to be another really good SEC test for the Bulldogs. They're off to a tough opening schedule. We'll see if they can get through it. Oklahoma and West Virginia, Big 12 matchup that should be really, really interesting. Of course, the Mountaineers, tough day against your Panthers last week. Oregon will take on Virginia. As we already mentioned, Auburn will host Florida Atlantic. Texas will head away from home to take on BYU in Provo for your Saturday night showdown. And finally, your Pitt Panthers set to host the Tennessee Volunteers in what should be a great matchup. Corso likes Tennessee. Of course, the Volunteers beat the Panthers last year. They're very, very talented. You could say fairly evenly matched teams. Both teams lost a lot of talent on the offensive side of the football. Tennessee retained a ton of fantastic defenders that's going to make them very, very hard to beat. The one thing the Panthers hopefully will turn around is turnovers. They were in that game against the Volunteers if they would have held on to the football. I think 5 turnovers in that game did them in, and that'll be where they'll look to get the victory this year. And of course, we look at the Tennessee team leaders. Adam Tyler actually played a lot of the action for the Volunteers, but he's more of their running type quarterback. John Gooden should be back at the helm for the matchup against the Panthers this week. Mills ran for 144 yards. Good performance for him. Leonard, 5 catches for 2 TDs. A couple of guys to watch out for there. Josh Ewing with the interception. He's a fantastic middle linebacker that's going to run the show for the Volunteers. And so we look at this talented Tennessee roster, and the big thing is a ton of 90 overall players, way more than we have on our roster. I believe they have 8 90 or better overall rated players. Really, really talented here, and a lot of guys to watch out for, especially like we mentioned on the defensive side of the ball. At quarterback, very, very good players. John Gooden is the pocket passer, doesn't run particularly often. When Adam Tyler comes into the game, he's the speed guy. He's really electrically quick, but he doesn't have a particularly great arm. John Gooden, very impressive thrower. Limited action in the Week 1 opener because they were playing an FCS squad. They knew they were going to win. They wanted to see how Tyler would fare in some game action, and they've got some good players behind them. Freshman Michael Rogers is very good, and then JT Smith the backup as well. But Rogers is another guy to watch out for. He and Tyler are definitely be competing with Gooden for some starting positions, and you could even see one of them transferring depending on how that job shakes out. At halfback, of course, they lost Jaron Ware, who was a Heisman contender for much of the season last year, and Nicholas Mills is taking over at halfback, the junior, backed up by senior Wayne Griffith. Pretty talented players, not the quickest, so hopefully we can get downhill and try and prevent them from finding open space, but definitely some talented players to watch out for in this matchup. Wide receiver, they're very, very young, but we know what kind of talent they have. Ernest Leonard is speedster, 5 catches, 2 touchdowns in the season opener. Very, very talented. Doyle's another guy to watch out for. And then they have some good possession receivers in Cole Bennett and Eric West to complement them. They're just so young at this position that they're really going to present a lot of problems moving forward. And where they're even better is if they can go 3 wide receiver, 2 tight end, or even use these tight ends as receivers. Tariq White and Ray Nelson are absolute studs. Eric Turner, their starting tight end, or Nelson, Turner, because Nelson they still have. Eric Turner, their starting tight end from last year, is in the NFL now, and they have 2 tight ends that could go to the show right behind him. Ray Nelson's very good. Tariq White's only a sophomore. He could be one of the best tight ends in the country, no doubt about it. So guys that can really hurt us in the passing game. Left tackle, Roderick Evans. They have 2 sophomore starting tackles, which is why Johnny Gibson, the senior, who started at tackle for them last year, has been relegated to the bench. Roderick Evans is a beast. Watch out for him moving forward. One of the best offensive linemen in the country in Sheldon Holiday, the left guard, so another really talented player. Center Jimmy Daniels is just solid, not spectacular, but very solid. Same with Josh Robbins and Jerome Wilson Carver. Either of those juniors could play, no problem with them. And then another really talented sophomore in Wilson Smith. So they're really, really strong across the line, which could present some problems for our defensive line. But you saw how good we were last week with getting after the quarterback from the linebacker position. So that'll require some of those wide receivers and tight ends to have to block in this one. Defensive side of the ball, they're very solid on the edges, but not spectacular. Adam Ross, Stanley Watson, 84 overall and solid. Justin Schneider, Andrew Bates, 84 overall and solid. Not going to scare you particularly, but they're decent. And where they really are talented is Steve Friedman in the middle is a fantastic, fantastic player, the senior. He's complemented by a sophomore, Isaiah McCall. He's going to be one of the best defensive linemen in the country soon. And then another really talented player, freshman Montrell Ware. So a lot of depth at those positions for the Volunteers. Outside linebacker is a bit of a question mark in one role in Bergstrand. If he starts, he is slower than a rock trying to run itself uphill. Bergstrand is so slow. Behind him is a sophomore, Kellen Gilmore, who's very good. I think he'll be a solid player. If he gets most of the playing time, they'll be set. If they stick in mostly 2 linebacker sets, they're unbelievable because Josh Ewing, one of the best linebackers in the country, I'd have him in the running for all the National Defensive Awards. He's backed up by Kavaris Scott, who's also very solid. But Greg Maddox on the right-hand side, not the pitcher. He's much, much quicker and more athletic. He'll get right after you. Greg Maddox is an unbelievable talent. Really, really good. John Calhoun behind him as well. But Maddox and Ewing are an unbelievable 1-2 tandem at linebacker. And then you get into their secondary, and they're just so, so good. Senior Andre Roberts is unbelievable, but true freshman JT Granger, one of the best cover corners that we've ever seen coming out of high school. already 87 rated, 97 speed. This guy can cover anybody, okay? He could cover the entire ocean if you asked him to. He's so good. They got Dennis Cochran behind him as well, so some really talented first three corners there. It drops off a little bit with Martin Brown Jr., Vernon Calhoun, etc. But, I mean, they're so good with their first three that it doesn't even matter, especially because they have a safety that can play as the dime corner if they need him to. Deshaun Conley, the junior free safety, very good. We can't say enough good things about him. But you get to strong safety, Will Thomas plays as their nickelback. He's a 90 overall strong safety, an absolute beast. He's rangy, 6'4", and he's backing up arguably the best defensive player in the country in J.R. Ingram. They are so solid in the defensive backfield that it's going to be very tough to deal with. At kicker, they got Brent Cronin, who's solid. Punter, Paxton Richard, also solid. Can't say anything bad about them, but it's a very talented team and one that could cause a lot of problems for your Pitt Panthers. So let me know in the comments how you think this game's going to shake out. Can we beat this really talented Volunteer squad that beat us last year, but this time we have them at home for the grudge match? Can the Panthers come away victorious? Let me know in the comments. As always, hail to Pitt. We'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.